Welcome in to the Wednesday edition of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Barry Allen joins me. Barry, we've got a little bit of NCAA stuff to talk about. We're still going to table some of this for later in the week. But the big story right now is LSU and who it is getting. It sounds to me like the Kevin O'Sullivan situation was just not a fit with some baggage that O'Sullivan had maybe off the field. I think LSU would love to have Tim Corbin. I don't know that that's realistic at this point. I don't think it probably is. And now talk has turned to Mike Bianco at Ole Miss. That seems like where LSU will probably settle. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think they would settle. Obviously, I think they would be getting a really good coach, and I think they'd be getting, former LSU player who was the catcher and Ben McDonald's catcher, and they went, Omaha, in 1989, and had done a tremendous job at Ole Miss. And I think he interviewed yesterday. I think you probably saw this. There was a podcast yesterday that Todd Walker was on, and he shared information with them that if LSU hired. He thought Mike Bianco was in town interviewing, and if LSU hired Mike Bianco as its head coach, that he would be interested in being Mike Bianco's hitting coach. And so you look at that, and looks like Mike has emerged as the top candidate with Cliff Godwin from East Carolina. Cliff was an assistant with Terry Rooney under Maneri in the early years of Maneri at LSU. So he has some LSU connections. He's also tied to Bianco as an assistant at Ole Miss, and has now gone to East Carolina and done a nice job there. The thing that perplexes me the most about all this is the anger. I don't know, anger is a good word, but the fact that the Ole Miss fans, I think, are excited that this might be happening. And they're going to lose a guy that's given his life to their program. I mean, I don't know how new and old some of these Ole Miss baseball fans are, but I remember a day where Ole Miss baseball was awful. I mean, there were teams that were bad. I mean, there were 4 or 5 bad teams in this league, and even the bad teams knew they could beat Ole Miss, and the good teams knew they were sweeps. I mean, they were guaranteed lead cinch lock sweeps, and that was one of them. And he's won almost 900 games at Ole Miss, and they've hosted super regionals, and yeah, I know they've had their issues in super regionals at home, and they lost to Virginia one year, Texas one year, Miami one year, in regionals at home and super regionals at home, and they've lost some regionals probably they shouldn't have. One recently with Tennessee Tech. Probably the best team Tennessee Tech will ever have. They got them in a 7-game series. And it's just amazing to me. And then you listen to, well, who is Ole Miss going to, if Mike Bianco leaves to go to LSU, well, who is Ole Miss going to hire? Well, then you see the names pop up. Dan McDonald, done a wonderful job at Louisville, several College World Series. I mean, obviously more than Ole Miss, but never won one. And then the other one is, they're talking about, well, we'll go get Cliff Godwin. And I think Cliff Godwin's a really good baseball coach, but is he better than Mike Bianco? I mean, before the advent of super regionals, East Carolina never won a regional. And they've won 3 regionals now in the super regional era, and they've gone to the super regionals, and they've gone 0-6. And in the last one they played in, they scored a run, one whole run in 18 innings. And that's not a knock on Cliff or anybody, but I'm just saying they ran into a really good Vanderbilt pitching staff. Sometimes your luck in these super regionals, have more to do with it than anything. You're like, oh God, what a terrible matchup. Go ask Texas Tech this year. I think they think now Stanford was a terrible matchup for them. But it just, to me, sometimes just doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, we're not happy with who we have, so we'll just go get somebody else. Well, okay, that sounds like a really good idea. That sounds like a great plan. That sounds like a great theory, but who are you going to go get? And then when you go get him, are you really better? Did he really do a better job than the guy he had? So So now you go from winning 40 games a year to 35 games a year, and you're getting in the regionals, but you're not hosting them and you're not winning them. And I mean, look at South Carolina. I mean, one of the elite programs in the country, going to regionals, super regionals in Omaha every year, back-to-back national championships in 2010 and 2011. Could have been considered one of the top 3 or 4 programs in the country, 10 years ago. Now, fast forward 10 years later, they've had, since Coach Tanner stepped down as the head coach and became the athletic director, they've had 2 head coaches. They've gone from winning the national championship in Omaha to not going to Omaha, to hosting and winning super regionals at home, to not hosting super regionals and winning super regionals at home, and hosting regionals at home to not even going to regionals. So the grass is not always greener. I mean, that's 10 years. I mean, that's a 10 years. South Carolina's gone from winning back-to-back national titles to this year being a 2 seed at home and being bounced in 3 games in their regional at home. And to some of those years, they didn't even go at all. So the grass is not always greener. And I think it's a good hire. If LSU makes this move and Mike wants to go there and makes this move, I think it's a good hire for LSU. I think it'd be really good for LSU, and maybe it'll be better for him because he'll go somewhere that maybe they appreciate him. I don't know if the Ole Miss fans don't appreciate him or not, but it just really is a head scratcher that how some of these coaches have the success that they have, and fans go, well, they want to do more. I mean, you can't compare your programs, I guess, to others. I mean, I guess you can. The fans do it, but I guess you're looking at Mississippi State's been to Omaha 3 years in a row, and felt like Ole Miss probably could have gone, and they haven't. But we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. With Oregon and Oregon State. I mean, Oregon State wins back-to-back national titles in 06 and 07, and Phil Knight at Oregon goes, "That's enough. We're bringing baseball back to Oregon, and I'm going to fund the program, and I'm building a stadium, and by golly, we're going to have baseball here. If they win, so can we." And Oregon's only been to 1 super regional. They've not been to Omaha since they brought the program back in 2009. But they have a program, and they have a good team, and they've created more interest in college baseball in the state of Oregon. So, but it just. You're trying to keep up with your neighbors and stuff, and I guess down here in the South, it does mean more, and it just really scratched my head when you look at that and they go, they're going to be happy if he leaves, a guy that's done so much for their program that's taken them from the bottom of the standings to SEC championships and super regionals and Omaha. It really just makes you think, what our world is really wanting, and how people are hard to please people sometimes, I guess.
I think the most underrated commodity in sports is being consistently really good. That is so much harder to do than people, I think, know. I think, frankly, it's harder to be consistently good than to be just okay or poor and then pop up and do a Florida Marlins every now and then. Being that, that's been a very mediocre MLB franchise, and it's made the playoffs twice. And oh, by the way, it's won the World Series twice. So here's where I'm going with this, okay? Mike Bianco, it's hard to find a coach in any sport anywhere who has gotten his program to the consistently good stage more than Mike Bianco has at Ole Miss. Now, the problem with that is also the most dangerous thing that you can do as a coach, because you get your program to a point and people say, well, goodness, obviously this program is right on the cusp of being great. And all we need to get there is just another guy who can get us there. And I saw this myself in Nashville with Vanderbilt. Now, Kevin Stallings was the guy that was kind of the Mike Bianco of college basketball in the SEC. Now, I would say Bianco has been a lot more consistent in terms of he makes more NCAA tournaments than Kevin Stallings did. Stallings got them to the Sweet 16 twice, and they never could get further. You could argue that they had some teams that should have been Elite Eight teams. And Kevin's rep was that he did more with less, but his best teams underachieved. And I think there was some degree of fair criticism to that. Now, the other factor with Kevin is Kevin was just prickly. And that made things tough internally if you had to deal with him. And I think that's a factor that probably, the best I can tell, does not apply here. But I see that situation very parallel to what Vanderbilt basketball went through. I'm not saying that's how it's going to end for Ole Miss if they make a coaching change, but Vanderbilt got Bryce Drew. He went to an NCAA tournament with Stallings players the first year, tried to get a higher degree of recruit. That did not work. And he was out after 3 years. Jerry Stackhouse has come in 2 years after. They've been last place both years, and I don't think they'll be last place this year, but I don't think that program is going anywhere anytime soon in terms of significant things. Maybe they'll get to the NIT. I don't know. I don't see a huge ceiling for Stackhouse at Vanderbilt. I think he does some good things, but I just, in the overall scheme of things, I don't see it. That's the biggest parallel that I see with this, and it would be very interesting if the changes made, the fallout from all this. I think it'd be very interesting to do a podcast 10 years from now to see how that all turned out.
Yeah, I think it might even be interesting to do it a year from today to see how all this shakes out. But we live in the world of, I hate to borrow a line from Nick Saban, but we live in a world of instant gratification. It's what have you done for me right now? We want dinner, but we want it cooked right now. So we have the microwave, but we stand in front of the microwave and we yell at it for a minute because it takes a minute to cook it. Everybody wants it right now, and everybody wants to be good, and everybody wants to go to Omaha right now, and only 8 people can go. And I mean, I know they've had way more successes at Ole Miss under Mike Bianco than failures. And I know people are frustrated that we mentioned those 3 years in a row they lost to Virginia, Texas, and Miami. It may not have been in that order, but it was those 3 teams. And they don't think Mike Bianco was frustrated about that. I mean, they were, and they won. And the super regional they won at ULL, they won there, and that's what got them to Omaha. I believe that was in 14. And I think that's their only Omaha trip since 14, or since he's been there. He's the longest tenured coach in the SEC in any sport actively, and I think what he's done there is tremendous. And I think I keep going back to this. When he took over, I mean they were bad. They were just bad, and everybody knew they could win. That was the series you knew you were going to win, and then all of a sudden they became really good, and that was the series that you hoped you could win. And then sometimes when you went over there, you hoped you didn't get swept. So, well, let's just hope we can get over and get one and get out of there, and don't get swept on the road, and try to win 2 out of 3 from them when you play them at home. But it's just these fan bases and these message boards and things that just go crazy with this. And it's harder now with social media, with Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. It's harder now. I mean, I'd like to see. I mean, I'd be interested to see how some of these older coaches, Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes, Coach Bryant, Vince Lombardi, Tom Landry, guys like that. Say football guys, and mainly, there should be some baseball guys too. Skip didn't have to do this at LSU with social media and stuff when he was coaching. I'd be interested to see how some of these guys handled that, responded to that, back in their day if this were available. And there'll be something that's not here now that coaches will have to deal with 10, 15 years down the road that these coaches don't have to deal with. But it's all about instant gratification, and they want it now. And you say, well, you got to be patient and wait your turn. I mean, but like I say, they've had more successes at Ole Miss under Mike Bianco than they have failures. And you said it right at the start, which is, spot on. I mean, it's hard to be consistently good. I mean, it really is. I mean, you could be, it's not hard to be consistently bad or consistently mediocre, because you can get a little lazy and let that go, but it's really hard to be consistently good. And we're talking about top 3 in the division, top 3 or 4 in the conference every year, most every year. Tremendous attendance, tremendous atmosphere, great players. I mean, look at some of the freshmen they've got, on this year's team. And if it weren't for Kevin Kopps and Rocker and Leiter, I mean, they may have had the pitcher of the year in the SEC, and Doug Nikhazy this year. And just they had a bad draw, I guess, in the Super Regional. I mean, they had to go on the road. They played a really good Arizona team that could hit and can score, and the number one scoring team in the country. And after watching 3 games, it's easy to see why. And but it's unfortunately for the fans today with social media, it's instant gratification, and it's what have you done for me today? And they didn't make it to Omaha again, and maybe this is what makes him go and takes that LSU job if that's what he wants to do, and if that's what LSU chooses to do. But if it happens, it'll be a good move for both parties.
Well, we've got about 5-6 minutes before we need to wrap up. I've got a son who's got to be at baseball camp, but you take this for granted. I mean, like, let's look at consistent programs, and you can name them. You could say teams that win every year. I'll just give an example. Oklahoma football. Oklahoma football has basically been rolling for 50 or 60 years minimum now, but went through a spell where it hired John Blake. Blake at Oklahoma went 3-8 in 96, 4-8 in 97, and 5-6 and 98. And of course, that was an outlier. But the point is, sometimes you just say, if you're out of school, you got the resources, you got things set up for whatever reason, that you're just going to win almost no matter who the coach is. Well, everybody's got a blip. Even Alabama football had one before Nick Saban, and we're not going to get into all that, but the point stands. But I will give the counterpoint to this. And we had Chase Parham from Rebel Grove on our podcast last week, and Chase and Neil McCready are both friends of mine, and they do, I think the Ole Miss podcast, the X on Oxford podcast is, first of all, if you're an Ole Miss fan and you're not listening, you need to be. Second of all, I think it's about as good a sports podcast as I have heard. Those guys tell it like it is. And I heard Chase trying to explain this yesterday. The rationale for LSU is that LSU is probably a couple of wins better in the SEC every year. And I hope I'm not butchering this, but I listened to it last night, and this is the way I remember it. LSU is a couple wins better than Ole Miss, all things being equal. So if you take Bianco out of Ole Miss and put him in LSU, you look at how many times he has just missed at Ole Miss. And he's right on the cusp. And the thinking is that LSU being a better job, that'll get him over the hump into Omaha, into the places that he's not been, and winning SEC titles, things like that. I think the other would be true also for Godwin if he were to take the Ole Miss job. I was really impressed with East Carolina, seeing them last weekend. I thought that they had a couple of pitchers who made them competitive with Vanderbilt. Ultimately, just it's hard to match up with Rocker and Leiter. Their bats got shut down, and maybe a team where you can recruit a little bit more talent, it gets a little bit more interesting. But I would think that Godwin, who's done great at East Carolina, maybe benefits from a similar bump up at Ole Miss. But I'm kind of like you. I have a hard time thinking that the next guy is going to take them a lot higher. The scholarship situation with the lottery there, I think, is difficult. But that is sort of the other side to why LSU would want Bianco, is that you go to a better program, and he's been so consistent, and just being in a better program can get you over the top into winning more games there.
Yeah, I don't have any doubt for LSU. I mean, that he would definitely come in and keep them at, you say, as they are. No, not 12 wins in the league. I mean, that just happened this year for them. I'm talking about consistent level of making regionals and making super regionals and going to Omaha. And I think that would continue at LSU with him, because he knows that culture. Not only did he play there, but he was an assistant there. And, he was a player in '89. He was an assistant when they won it in '91. I'm sorry, he was not. He was an assistant when they won it in '93. He was an assistant when they won it in '96, and he was an assistant when they won it in '97. And before he left to go to McNeese, and then left McNeese and went to Ole Miss from there. But he knows the Louisiana culture. I mean, he knows the program. He knows the ins and outs. And he played for Coach Bertman, and I think he would have his endorsement, and I think he would have I think all the LSU people would be excited to have him there, and continue on what they have and go, well, he got to super regionals at Ole Miss, but they were on the road. Some of them were at home. Some of them were on the road. If he comes here and we're 41 wins or whatever, those super regionals are now going to be in Baton Rouge, and we're, almost impossible to beat at home, when things are rolling. And now all of a sudden those 3 super regionals in a row that you lost at Ole Miss, now you win at LSU. Instead of having 1 trip to Omaha, now you got 4. And it could be a big difference for both of them. And I agree. And Oklahoma's a good analogy. I mean, they've been to the college football playoff every year they've had it, or all but 1 year that they've had it, but can't win the semifinal game. So when, Lincoln Riley's as good as he is in football and the gaudy record that he has, when's it, when you talk about that with Oklahoma, when's it going to be put up or shut up time for him? I mean, they get crushed by Alabama, or they get crushed by LSU, or whoever in these semifinal games, and most of their semifinal games that they played are not competitive. So when does that start rubbing the Oklahoma faithful in football the wrong way? Well, I know you've only lost 9 games, but 5 of them have been in the semifinals by double digits. When are you going to win that semifinal game and get in? And it's like I said, it's what have you done for me lately? And that's what everybody wants right now. When the old adage is still true today: we're with you, win or tie. And that, unfortunately, that's the way our culture is.
Well, the danger of doing a podcast like this is in coaching searches, hours or what used to be days or weeks. And so, by the time people listen to this, a decision may have been made one way or the other. If Bianco goes to LSU, then this is relevant. If they change direction in the search, then we're going to be like, what did we just spend 25 minutes on? But that's the way the world goes these days. And so we'll follow that story. One more thing quickly, Barry. One thing I've been watching in the Vanderbilt half of the bracket in Omaha is Arizona was without a couple of relievers, Randy Abshire and Gil Luna. Luna, particularly a really good guy, a lefty, just really tough to hit. But Arizona suspended both those guys. The school did, not the baseball program, for the Tucson Super Regional, and Arizona won without them. I think that anytime you're without some of your better relievers going into Omaha, that's not ideal. They asked Coach Jay Johnson yesterday about those guys, yesterday being Tuesday, whether they would go to Omaha. He had no update. So that is one thing to watch as we are days away from the start of things. Vanderbilt and Arizona will play on Saturday night. But that's kind of, I guess, the outstanding news item for Omaha right now is how that settles.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the more intriguing matchups in the first round, and we'll get into those obviously as things move along. But we'll get into those. But that's an interesting matchup with Vandy's pitching in their offense. But yeah, how will those two guys be with them in Omaha? Abshire was 4-0 with a 2.91 ERA and gave him 20 innings, and Luna had 14 appearances and a 1.69 ERA. He actually had a save in the regional against UC Santa Barbara. And another interesting thing is they went off the page in Game 3 against Ole Miss the other night and started Dawson Netz. Had 24 relief appearances this year, made his first start of the year in Game 3, and he got them through enough that they could score, and then he didn't get a decision in the game. But they started Silseth in Game 1, who's 8-1, and Garrett Irvin in Game 2. Looks like those guys, and then Chandler Murphy have the bulk of their innings this year, and the bulk of their decisions. They've won, trying to add in my head, 21 of their 44 games that they've won are from those guys. So it'd be interesting to see their shakeup in Omaha with their pitching and how they will handle things if those two young men are not with them. It didn't really hurt them at home against Ole Miss. They had one game where all three of those games were high scoring, lopsided games, but it didn't. I don't think it really affected them that much in the games against Ole Miss. But I think over the course of a week or so in Omaha, it could play a huge role for them.
All right. We appreciate you listening to the Wednesday edition of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We will be back with more episodes of this Thursday and Friday as we close in on Omaha. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get those. Be sure to check out our written content at southeastern14.com. That's all free. And please follow us on Twitter at 14 Southeastern. Anyway, for Barry Allen, I'm Chris Lee. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again with another episode of the 14 on Thursday.